This is Aaron with ANET Computers from ANETcomputers.com with another obvious YouTube video. This one deals with Dell DataSafe Restore. So Dell has a utility on some of their newer computers that's basically a backup and restore. So that's what this video is going to entail. So I filed this under data backup procedures as well as operating system problems. You could use this utility to create an emergency backup and then not restore your computer, or you could also use this utility to restore your operating system. Maybe it's virus infected or has some kind of massive problem with your Microsoft Windows XP, Vista 7 or 8, and you just want to restore your computer back to factory. And you could use this utility for both. You can back up your data and then restore your computer back to factory settings. So we'll get to more details as I go over this blog post on my website, ANETcomputers.com. So Dell DataSafe Restore and Emergency Backup. Restore your Dell PC. Today, I will show you how to restore a Dell computer using their Dell DataSafe Restore and Emergency Backup tool. This procedure was used to successfully restore a Dell Inspiron 545 back to factory condition. Also, this tool was used to back up user data. So that's not a brand spanking new computer, but it's obviously still out in business environment because I had a customer that brought me their Dell Inspiron 545. It was virus infected, malware infected, and what I ended up having to do was I decided to perform a wipe and a reload. Now there's different ways to perform a wipe and a reload. I like to, if a customer brings me their computer, I like to see if there is a factory recovery utility. As long as the hard drive isn't corrupt, as long as the file structure on the hard drive is not corrupt. A lot of these newer computers, dual cores, i3s, i5s, i7s, even older Pentium 4 class computers were being shipped with a recovery partition. Restore partition, pretty much it's the same thing, just different verbiage. So I looked, and then I went out on the internet. Not every, even within computer models or computer makers, not every Dell computer has the exact same process on how to get to the recovery partition. This one's a little bit different. Sometimes you just hit a keystroke. This one, you hit a keystroke, but it was also built into the F8, so we'll get to that. So these instructions were written specifically for an Inspiron 545, but I think you could definitely use this for other Dell computers that have this DataSafe Restore and Emergency Backup tool. And then I prefer because that saves me a lot, because let's say they bring you a computer and the COA, which is the Certificate of Authenticity sticker, let's say it's scratched up or you can't read it or it's missing, and you're like, well, then what happens as a computer repair technician, you can legally have the installation media and you can make copies and stuff like that, or it's not that expensive. You can buy one copy and burn one backup as a computer repair technician. Well, if somebody brings you a computer and they are missing their COA sticker, well, then what are you going to do for a license? There are tools out there that you can get to their COA serial number so that you can reinstall Windows, but then you're wasting time. So I like to immediately try to use a built-in recovery partition on a end user's computer, and this computer happened to have one and it worked flawlessly. So let's get back to this blog post. To begin with, boot or reboot your computer and then press an F8 key after a Dell BIOS splash screen displays and before Windows attempts to boot. At an advanced boot menu, select quote, repair your computer in quotes. You will see that in a menu. You should see a Windows is loading files message. So once you hit F8, you should see a black advanced boot options menu. Windows XP, Vista, 7, 8. Then that's where you want to select repair your computer. And then you should see a Windows is loading files message. At a system recovery options screen, select a keyboard import method. If you live in the United States of America, you can select a default of US, United States. Next, select choose administrator or an account with administrator rights and a username drop-down list. So if you live in America, you should just select the default keyboard as US. If you don't live in America, then you can hit a drop-down dialog and select a different keyboard that's more appropriate for your use. And then also, you want to choose an administrator account or the administrator account. If the Windows administrator account is not available, which might be because Windows 7 and 8, they pretty much Microsoft disable it. You can enable it, but by default, I think out of the box, it's not enabled. It might not show up. Well, then you can select an user account that has administrator rights. You have to have administrative rights in order to factory recover a computer. Type a password if applicable. If your username, let's say it was Ted or Bill or Melinda or whoever, that's your username. If you had a password with it in order to use it in Windows, then you have to type a password, the same password, when you use this recovery utility. So type a password if applicable. At, quote, choose a recovery tool, unquote, you want to pick Dell, DataSafe Restore, and Emergency Backup. So you will have a choice at a recovery tool. You can select Restore Computer and Preserve My New or Change Files recommended. Okay, so this, I recommend this. If you are wanting to restore your Dell computer back to factory settings, the way you bought it, and also back up your data, I recommend just accepting the defaults. If you only want to restore your computer back to factory, as my Android notifies me that it's charged. Anyways, if you have already performed the backup yourself, or you don't care about the files on your computer, you just don't care, what happens is it will back up all your data from the time that you first starting using your computer. So that's a very valuable tool. If you don't care about any of the files, pictures, photos, videos, whatever, or you've already backed it up yourself, or you use an online backup, or you use a cloud service and you're not worried about it, then you don't have to choose that. You don't have to restore a computer and preserve my new or changed files. So that's important to know. If you want to back up and restore, then choose the defaults. Click Next to scan computer for changed files. So if you do decide to preserve your new and changed files, it will scan your computer for any new files that it notices. It can take a while. Whereas if you don't choose that option, it will skip that and it'll speed up this process. In emergency file and folder backup, check any file types you do not want backed up and restored. So even if you selected restore computer and preserve my new or changed files, which is basically means it's going to back it up, those files up, you can still selectively select which type of files that you don't want backed up. So that's also a pretty decent ability in this program. Click Next to proceed after you can choose the defaults, or you can check any file types that you don't want backed up. Select a destination folder for your emergency backup and click Next. This could be very important. I think the default setting on this computer, Dell Inspiron 545, was the C:(emergency folder. It copied all the end user's files or customer or client to the C emergency folder. So you just might want to you can accept the default, just make a note of it so that when you get everything backed up and then Windows gets reinstalled and then you're able to log in again, at least you'll know where it's at so that you can restore those files. Or you might want to write this down. I would, obviously it's your free choice. Either make a mental note or write it down. And you don't have to select the default. You can change the folder. When I performed this, I just selected all the default settings. But I did read through them. I went through every screen and made sure that I backed up my client's data using this tool and that Windows was properly reinstalled and I didn't have any problems. But I did choose most defaults, such as the destination folder. A summary of files backed up is listed. So once it backs up your files, so first it goes out on your computer and scans for any files that have been added to your computer since you first started using it. So let's say you bought a Dell Inspiron 545 brand new out of the box, and you open it up and you boot it up. Well, then you started to add documents, right? Isn't that the point of a computer? You've got Word documents or text files or pictures or videos or MP3s, whatever. Well, it accumulates. Well, this program will go out there and scan for those files, and it will back them up for you too. And it will also give you a report. So if you are confused or you just want to make sure that you got your data backed up, you can go through the report and it shows you all the files that it gives you a summary. So perhaps you didn't get certain files backed up. Well, what you could do is you could abort and then retry, go back in and try the backup and restore again. Or then you could, maybe you're hesitant. You're like, well, then you could back up the files yourself, or you could have somebody back them for you, or you could take it to a computer repair technician, whatever. But at least it prints out a summary. And then click next to proceed. Your data is now being backed up. Really, it's your data is now being, yes. It scans them, and then it shows you a summary of files scanned is, I think that's not correct. I might have to fix this blog post. I don't want to confuse people. It gives you a list of files that have been scanned and then will be backed up. Then your data gets backed up. Your file should be successfully backed up. It tells you that whether or not this backup is successful. Click next to continue. When it only took me one run, and it did pop up and display a message saying that your files were successfully backed up. At, quote, restore my computer, unquote, select yes to continue and click next. So it's asking you, do you want to restore your computer? Just say yes. A new partition will be formatted automatically for you. Your system backup that you previously created will be restored. Now, there is a bit of a caveat, and I'll get to that as I continue. What I mean by that is all of those files that you selected, they will be backed up, and then they get copied back. Once the operating system gets restored to factory settings, just like the way it was when you opened the box up or as soon as you first started using that brand new computer, Dell, it will back up those files that you accumulated, and then it will copy them back out to your computer. But it's a little bit more technical. Maybe that's for a different video. It compresses them into multiple files, and then it curates it and executable. But I think I'll leave that for last to comment about it. But it can be a little bit overly technical, perhaps. And then this is a image that I found on the internet. This is exactly what I saw when I hit the F8 key on a Dell Inspiron 545 after I went in and I chose at the very beginning. Remember, at the very beginning, you select repair your computer. You want to select that option, repair your computer. Then you get this menu, system recovery options. Obviously, there's different tools. You could do a startup repair, system restore, Windows complete, PC restore, command prompt, but that's for another video. I just want to stick to the bottom selection. See, Dell, with some of their computers, they added a menu option to the advanced boot options menu, the F8, the Microsoft. It's at the very bottom, as you can see. Dell DataSafe Restore and Emergency Backup. Restore your computer to working condition, including factory state, and it works. And it works very well. At least for me, it did. I've used Dell's factory recovery tools and Asus and Compaq and HP. A lot of times they work flawlessly, but it depends on the condition of the hard drive. Obviously, if you've wiped your hard drive and you formatted the hard drive, it's not going to work unless you're able to. That's another video too. But so as you can see, there's a menu option. A recovery completed message should be displayed. So once things are completed, it'll display that message. Click on restart to restart your computer. So what happened was that Dell's DataSafe Restore and Emergency Backup restored your computer back to factory. And also, if you chose it, or if you choose to decide in the future to also back up your files, it backs up your files, it compresses them, and it also copies them onto the new partition. And then once you reboot your computer, Microsoft Windows should now boot. And then you may receive a check disk message. When I restored this client's computer, I did receive a check disk message, and I did allow it to run a scan, although it was only a 3-part scan, so it wasn't the 5-part scan if you're familiar with check disk. It didn't take that long. I recommend you allow a check disk scan to run. I didn't have any other problems. I didn't find any problems. I think as a precaution, I would recommend, if it does prompt you to run a check disk, just go ahead and run it. It doesn't really take that long. It's a 3-part, at least with this Dell it was. But you don't have to. You certainly don't have to. A setup is preparing your computer for first use. Message should be visible. Look for a setup Windows message. You can accept defaults and click next. Type a username for your new installation of Microsoft Windows. So here's where you set up your username account again. If your old username was Ted or Bill or Tom or whatever, well, then you can type in the same username. Also, another feature, I guess, or you can change a computer name here instead of an automatically created one. So you can, after you typed in your username, I've noticed on Windows 7 and Windows 8, what it will do is it will give you an assigned automatic name. What it will do is it will add your username plus -PC. You can change that. You can click in that box, the computer name box. You can delete it out and then rename your computer to whatever you want. You can set a password here, which is highly recommended. If you want to secure your computer, you can set a password during this process. I recommend it, but you don't have to. It's your free will. You don't have to set a password. And then if you do set a password, you must retype your password a second time if you set a password. A password hint is also required if you set a password. So if you do set a password for your username, you must type a password hint. Click next to proceed. You must accept both license terms. It's going to pop up a window with licensing terms for, I think one was Microsoft and one was Dell. Click next to continue. At select Windows updates, you can use a default, use recommended settings. I recommend you just choose defaults for this, but you don't have to. You don't have to enable Windows updates at this point. When it asks you to review date and time settings, select your computer's current location time zone, i.e. Mountain if you live in Mountain time zone. So if you want to make sure that your computer's time is correct with the time zone that you live in, let's say you live in Mountain time zone, right here is where you would set that. I think by default, I've noticed that Microsoft Windows products, I think they default it back to Pacific, something like that. It doesn't detect what time zone you're in. It just selects an arbitrary default. So that's where you change your time zone to reflect the time zone that you are currently at. Windows will now finalize your settings. You can accept defaults at a Dell support software screen and personalized settings screen. Finally, click Finish to completely back up your important files and restore your Dell computer to factory settings. So if this is what you want, if you want to restore your Dell computer back to factory settings and also back up your files that you have accumulated, then follow my instructions verbatim. Don't just select the defaults. If you don't want to, let's say, restore your files, you don't want them to back up, well then when it asks you to scan for changed, new and changed files, don't select that. Don't back up your files. Just allow it to restore your computer back to factory. Or you can also use this utility to just make an emergency backup. Just back up your files and then don't restore your computer. Also, with Dell's DataSafe Restore Emergency Backup, within Windows, if you boot to Windows, you should be able to find this utility, and I think you are able to make a backup. I think a free one. And then I think you are able to restore. So that might be another video. But I left that out because this will get you through the process. This will back up your important files and then restore your computer back to factory. If you want to restore your files, the backup, you have to go to their Dell DataSafe Restore and Emergency Backup. What you do, okay, here's the quick synopsis or a quick description. Remember the emergency folder. Remember it defaulted C emergency, or if you changed it wherever you decided to save that file, you go to that folder. As a matter of fact, I accepted all the defaults and I didn't have any problems except for I got a check disk message and then I allowed it to run a check disk scan. But other than that, I didn't have any problems. Is that it will create a shortcut on your desktop when you first log in, and it's titled Emergency Backup. I mean, it's right there on the desktop. You double click it, and it takes you to the folder. It took me to C Emergency folder. Well, within that folder, at the very top, there's a file. It's an executable. The very first file. All the other ones are compressed files. You don't have to do anything with those. The very top file with a little Dell green icon, double click it, that's an executable file. Then that brings up Dell DataSafe Restore, and then from that menu you can recover your files. You can recover all your files at once, which I did. Or you can even recover your files. There are certain menu options in there where you can select which files you want to recover. Now, if you want even more, you have to pay though. There's a problem with, it's not a problem. In order, let's say you want to go through all your files that were backed up and you want to pick them one by one, just wherever they are, from this folder, from that folder, that costs money in order for you to be able to browse your files and then select just one file at a time or one folder at a time or a group of files. But there are some free tools with this utility. I was able to select basically my client's profile. I was able to restore their photos, their pictures, their documents, their music files and their video files. On Windows 7, you have in your profile, in your users profile, and then you've got your documents, your pictures, your videos. You know what I'm talking about, that file structure? Well, with this utility, it basically will restore and also your favorites. I was able to restore their favorites. So I was able to pick about, I think it was 5 or 6 main options. And then I selected all of them, and then I ran the restore. It took a little while, and it restored all of their files. And it restored them back to where they were before, back under their Windows 7 user profile directory. And it was a fabulous tool. It worked the exact way it was intended. Now, there could be problems though. But I think that's another video. There could be problems with the recovery or confusion, or maybe it doesn't, it should work flawlessly though. Recovering your Windows 7 to factory and then restoring those files that were backed up. You might have a few issues, but again, most recovery utilities that are placed on recovery partitions for most of these computer makers, Asus, HP, even old Compaq and Dell, a lot of times they just run the way they're supposed to. But anyways, you can always browse. Hopefully these tips helped you restore your Dell computer and also back up your files if you want it to, and then also restore your files. And these instructions were written for a Dell Inspiron 545, but as long as your Dell computer has Dell DataSafe Restore Emergency Backup, I don't see why you couldn't use these instructions so that you can restore your computer back to factory, and also, if need be, you can back up your files and then also restore them. Anyways, you can always browse to anetcomputers.com for more potential tips to solve your most common computer problems. And thank you for listening.